Hello and welcome to our discussion about how to support employee wellbeing in a high-performance culture. I'm Jane Robertson from Frog Systems, the employee wellbeing platform provider, and I'm delighted you're here with us for this important conversation today. Now, we know that in our working lives, the pressure can seem relentless to get that deal over the line, to respond to a client's long list of latest demands, to achieve the success your organisation expects. But at what cost? Insecurity, stress, relationship problems, sickness. When you look at the potential impact, the list can be long. So today we're looking at how high pressure environments and well-being can work together so that you and your teams perform at their best while you still thrive as individuals. Please post any questions that you have in our comments and we'll do our best to answer them as we go along. Now, I'm delighted to say that my guests today are from the worlds of international law, sport and business. Introducing Jason Brisbane, who is the CEO of GB Wheelchair Rugby. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Jane. Thanks for having me.
Blessed to have you here. Starting out as a player in the NFL, Jason led a hugely successful program then to grow the game here in the UK. He is also EMEA chair for the Global Institute of Sport, developing the next generation of sports leaders. Parul Patel was a top legal counsel working with the likes of Nike, Unilever and Eversheds, who knows the toll that high pressure can take. She left the law to set up training company Fuel and Move, where she now trains teams to enjoy both optimal performance and team togetherness. Hi, Parul.
Hi, Jane. Nice to be here.
And Chris Preston is co-founder of business consultancy The Culture Builders. Having worked in senior leadership himself, Chris now works with some of the biggest companies across the globe and here in the UK, helping their senior leaders to achieve effective and efficient high-performance working. Chris, welcome.
Good afternoon, Jane. Great to be on the call with you.
Thank you so much. What a great panel we have today. And I just really want to start, I guess, by going around the panel to find out a little bit about why high performance and wellbeing is so important to you in the work that you do. So, Jason, you're in a very highly competitive sports culture. Can you explain a little bit about the work that you do at GB Wheelchair Rugby and the work you've done before and why this is such an important issue for you?
Thanks, Shane. Well, at Great Britain Wheelchair Rugby, we have an elite Great Britain squad who compete at the Paralympics, where the reigning Paralympic champions, and also compete in European championships and world championships frequently. And obviously, we also have a grassroots department as well, who's really about growing the game of wheelchair rugby for people with a wide range of disabilities right across the UK. And ultimately, we think the link with well-being and high performance is that people need to feel valued, and if people feel valued, they can perform better. That's why I want to see believing. So it's really key that people are able to, be whether that be mental health, whether that be physical health, whether that be in enjoying their work. Those things are going to be really critical to a high performance culture, because if you look at any team, any sports team, the ones that perform the best, a lot of the time they have these things in place. Now there are moments where things, you can have very short-term wins, but to have that sustained win and that's a sustained success, well-being sits at the heart of that.
And Parul, working in the legal sector as you've done over many, many years, just like the environment that Jason has been talking about, competition, getting contracts done, deals done, all adds to a massive pressure on people working in the sector.
Yes, there's a massive problem, I think, massive challenge that the legal sector have got. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from the sports sector, which I think it's, in the sports sector, they are really looking at high performance and they're super focused on what success looks like and setting people up to be successful. And I think by comparison, when we look inside the legal sector and many other sectors, not just the legal sector, we often confuse what high performance means with something that looks like high pressure, working super long hours, being under constant stress. And if you're not able to cope with it, being labeled with, oh, you're not resilient enough, or you can't take it, you can't crack it, this isn't for you. trying to fight against those. And there's some interesting statistics from the corporate world. I think high performers, 20% of people who are identified as high performers ended up with burnout. And with last year, year before, Law Care did a survey in the legal sector, and we're already starting to see junior lawyers starting to identify and complain about the levels of stress that they're expected to work under. So it's hugely important for the same reasons that Jason was talking about, that if you truly wanted to go after high performance and be successful and sustainably successful, I think that's really important to call out. If this is about the sustainable success, then you have to start at the foundations. And I love this quote by Michael Jordan, where he says, "You get the fundamentals down and the level of everything you do will rise." And I just think that well-being sits right there in the fundamentals. If you've got a fractured foundation, you really have to question how high can you rise and stay on that projection.
And Chris, Parul was saying there, the difference between performance and pressure, and maybe we mix that up too much sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely echo what both Parul and Jason are saying there, in terms of traditionally we've seen performance as work as hard as you can for as long as you can. And the first thing that sport will tell you is you don't do that. You think about high performing athletes, they will hit peak performance very rarely in a very specific moments. And yet at work, we think that peak performance can be achieved 5 days a week, 8-9 hours a day. So absolutely. But the challenge is, what we've got to understand is the difference between people facing some pressure and some stress that is a natural part of life and work, and helping them be resilient, and people facing far too much for far too long and the burnout it causes. You've got the two words together. You've got well-being and high performance in the statement of this webinar, and people tend to see them as two things, and they're not. You think about long-term high performance has to be based on well-being. Otherwise, you're just running the engine for too long with no oil, and it grinds to a halt. So what we're seeing a lot at the moment is organizations putting in place well-being because it feels like the right thing to do. What we've got to see is organizations putting it in place as part of a plan to make sure that they've got a workforce that can cope with highs and lows sustainably. So that high performance is those rapid bursts where they're needed, and then the withdrawal and the rest and the recovery, and on to the next one. And it's how we help people see that positive cycle, how we help people use the language and the tools to both express what they're experiencing, but also for themselves to understand what it takes and what they should and shouldn't be doing, and understand the factors around things like burnout. Your burnout is a terrible thing, and it's not just I'm tired, it's I am done. The tank is empty. And if you've just spent, and this is the irony, that the most expensive thing that most people will sign off on are people. So if you hire a mid-level executive, you're probably making a 5-year investment of nearly £500,000. Now, if I bought a £500,000 car, I would treat it like a baby. And yet we get these people and we put them at the point where they snap and they're broken, and we move on to the next one. And it's not sustainable, and it's not right either. Your work should not make people into broken things.
Yeah, Jason, obviously the sporting analogy both Chris and Parul have mentioned there. So let's go back to you. When you're creating a high performing sports team, you don't expect, for instance, a sprinter to go out and sprint 100 meters, 5 days a week, 365 days a year. So how in your playing days, and now, being the chair of wheelchair rugby, how do you get people to perform when you need them to, but give them that time, that downtime, that time to recover and rest and recuperate and be ready for the next burst?
Well, I think it's about, first of all, getting clear about the calendar, right? And being clear about when the points in the year are where it's going to be all systems go, right? Because people can often, you hear plenty of people say, oh, I don't always get my leave, use all my leave throughout the year and what have you. And it's things like that leave people to get burned out, right? Because they're not clear on where the kind of inflection points are, or where the down dips are. And so I think it's really important for myself and my senior managers to be really clear to people, to say, hey, look, we need people around these points here, but here make sure you take your leave, make sure you're taking that time off. We've also implemented well-being days, every quarter, so that it doesn't count to their annual leave allowance, because I'm trying to be clear to say, look, there's a day where you can just do what you want, but do something that makes you feel good. For some individuals, it might be going to see that film in the cinema. For some people, it might be sorting out their allotment, whatever it is. But what I try and do is just try to make it really clear that it's fine. You don't need to be going 100 miles an hour all the time, because actually, when you look at the athletes aren't going 100 miles an hour all the time, because the sports scientists won't let them. So we've got to then make sure we do the same thing in the business culture, because actually, and to Chris' point as well, it's people are driving the business either way. So if you want people to do the best job, then you need to look after them.
And Parul, I think you've talked about this before about, you wouldn't go and run a marathon when you're badly injured. So why would you force somebody to kind of carry on working when they're not at their sort of peak?
That's right. I mean, as I said, it all goes back to kind of the foundations of what make up people. And if we allow too much pressure to go on and we're not reinforcing just the core elements of ourselves, which is, rest and recovery is a massive part in sports training, but also in human life, right? We need to have downtime in order that we can be at our best. And I think this is a really again, there are many similarities between what we see in sport: high pressure, high performance, expectations are high, little room for error really on performance day, similar to what we see in the legal sector. But I think the big contrast for me is that in sport, everyone seems to be trying to set the team up to be successful, and that means looking at things in a very different way, looking at all the different angles, looking at not being driven by what is conventionally true always, but exploring the outlying changes. And we saw that, for instance, in British cycling, when they started to really invest in the equipment that was being used, looking at everywhere they can get this, like a marginal gain at the time it was being coined. It's not immediate. It's not always, directly transferable. The corporate world is different to the sports world. But there are things that we can learn. But the overall concept is that, we try in sport, we are trying to set people up for success. And I think in the corporate world, that's where we miss out. We want to have all the kind of high octane, high pressure, chest out, journey going at pace. How much do we revere fast-paced environment? You're coming into a fast-paced environment. It's just like the title when you get a global job. And I want to say to people, if you're going for a global job, basically working around the clock. That's all it is. It sounds sexy and lovely, but you're basically working around the clock. As someone who's done that work. And look, and how can you do that? Okay, there are roles where you need somebody who's got that global view, but how can you do that in a way that isn't destroying the person who you put all this responsibility on for a reason? You've given them that responsibility because they're there to do an important job. It's not because they're not important. So why wouldn't you set them up to be successful?
Chris, do you think business leaders are starting to understand this a bit more now? Because, as we've kind of alluded to, it's always been work hard, play hard, and just suck it up and get on with it. We've talked about this a number of times on various different webinars. Do you think they genuinely are now starting to realize that actually that doesn't produce the best results?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think there's a change. I think the thing is, though, as one attitude disappears, I think that there's other ones coming in around pressures of work and the need to meet targets and KPIs in an ever more difficult environment. So I think there's more recognition that people are important, but there is also more of a driver in a tough world to deliver work with less resources for less money. So I think there's that balance, isn't there, where we're not seeing the fact that short term we'll get there, long term we won't. And it's interesting that we talk a lot about parallels from sport. And I think one of the things that leaders could learn the most from is that if you look at a really successful sporting organization, they're doing two things really well. They're making it about people and they're managing their talent effectively. Because you think about it, sport doesn't work without people. And coaches in sport, they're focusing on people, not on the equipment, not on anything else. It's the people side of things. So when you look at an organization, what we're very good at is looking at output. And that doesn't then show us the whole machine. And what leaders have got us to do is stop and look at, what am I doing with my people? How am I coaching them? A study came out recently that a company swapped out all of its managers for coaches. Literally took every manager out of their management role and put a coach in place, and productivity shot up. Now, there's all sorts of conversations about, is that causal or is it a correlation? But either way, it does show a direction of travel that if you want to be a good leader, you should be people first and think through. So am I fielding a well-rested, healthy, happy, focused team that understands the purpose? Because if you're working hard and you don't know why, that's very toxic. So people will work hard if they genuinely feel there's a reason why. It's why Jason's team will absolutely flog themselves on the pitch, because they know why, they understand the win. But if you're sat there thinking, I don't know why I'm doing this, it's very demoralizing. So I think there's a whole picture to look at of what we're facing in terms of an organization. Many organizations are traditional and they're wrestling with the wrong conversations. We've got this big, is it a 4 or 5 day week conversation? Where do we work? When do we work? We're missing the bigger conversation about how do we make sure that people are set up for success. Start there and then unpack it. Not, we did this in the pandemic, therefore we should do it now.
Yeah. Parul, I mean, you gave up, didn't you? You sort of changed career and direction because of the pressure and the stresses that you were under. Can you just sort of maybe just tell us a little bit about what you went through? And, Chris was talking there about, it's about managing talents and, making sure you're helping your people. But that talent management is critical, because if a business loses somebody that they've invested, like we said, a lot of money in, it's talent wasted, isn't it? What did you go through? And I also wonder, do women in senior roles maybe struggle with this a bit more than men? I genuinely don't know the answer to that.
Well, I think the reason I left full-time corporate world or corporate legal world was because I could see these things existing, just perennial complaining from both sides, from both leaders and from junior lawyers, each with their own complaints. And, for something that is a relatively simple solution, if all parties want to find a way forward. But we seem to get stuck in the known behaviors and the known patterns. And I wanted to step out and help people work through that and build a bridge between the different layers, build a bridge so that people are within teams are being set up to be successful, and that looks at a lot of different things. And my own experience was, I think to myself, as a lawyer, that's minimum 6 years of your life go just into training to become that thing. Plus, I mean, when I was qualifying, there wasn't really a huge expense associated with it because we still had free university education and grants to go to university. But now you've got this huge student debt that goes along with it. You've got 6 years of your life, and it is hard work. The study in itself is quite hard. To then go into a profession where you feel like you're being flogged every day, it doesn't make any sense to me, and it's 100% unnecessary and futile, quite frankly. And it's funny, when I was sharing this event with the people within my network, it brought up a whole bubbling stream of people saying, Parul, can I get half an hour with you? I just need some guidance on this, with issues. And it's a fair point that you talk about, do women experience it in a more intense or more regular or more chronic way than men do? I don't know statistically what the right answer is, but anecdotally, I would say yes, because on top of the pressure to perform and deliver the output, you're also not given the resources, you're not given the voice, you get mansplained when you're around important tables. Now, that personally, that wasn't my experience when I was working at Nike, and this is also quite a big motivation for me, was that I had that was lucky enough to work at a time when we had a team that was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. No individual was perfect or flawless. In fact, we came with all our junk to the table, but we were so clear on what we were there to do. We were so clear on our seek, sign, serve approach to how we looked after sports marketing assets. And when we came together, it felt absolutely sublime. In the way we were working towards this thing, and it was inspiring because you were going to work every day with people who are not only trying to be their best, but who were being enabled to be their best. And I think there's a big difference between, you can be trying to be your best, as many of us do, but then being held back from actually being able to be it. And that's where the frustration and friction happens, and the negative friction, should I say. It's when there isn't that alignment, and you want to go, but you can't, and it's for no good reason, whether it's insecurities in your team, or the leadership doesn't understand, or there isn't a clear message, or your own interpretation of the situation. But these are real things. That they're small things, but they're totally people focused things. And yeah, I would say, just from my experience, I suspect that women do suffer. Women do experience it in a more harsh way.
Yeah, Jason, I was just thinking there. You got that chance to be an NFL player. A very different culture, presumably in the US to potentially back here in the UK. Did that purpose piece that Parul's talking about there? You knew why you were there. You knew what you had to achieve. There were, goals, whatever you want to call it, that the purpose was there from the start, and you bought into that. Is there a difference in the cultural aspect of this at all? Does it work better in the US than it does here? Is it something we're now learning that we should have learned years ago?
I mean, the thing with purpose, right, is it's in some ways it can be a double-edged sword, right? Because in some aspects, or in many aspects, purpose gives you that clear focus, that clear drive. You know where you want to go, you know where you want to be, and you're prepared to put up with anything and break through anything that's in your way, right? And when you get a group of people like that together, you can achieve some incredible things, and teams, whether that be in business or in sport, right? When everybody's lined up, cultural alignment, you have great things happening. I would think the downside of that sometimes, though, is when you're bringing people into that environment who may not, kind of intrinsically have that same purpose and relationship with the sport or the cause like you do. So, for example, when I transitioned after playing and worked in education for a piece and went back to work for the NFL in the UK, my relationship with the NFL was far different to many other people in the organization, because the vast majority of them hadn't played, hadn't gone through 2-a-day practices, hadn't hit their head against other people to try and make them go backwards. So what I was prepared to go through, what I was prepared to do for the organization was slightly different. So, but that's not a good or a bad thing. But I think ultimately, especially you have a leader, and even potentially a business owner, you've got to remember that what you're prepared to go through and your relationship with the business or the cause may be very different with other people, and you need to be fine with that. And it's not about lowering expectations, it's just the understanding that everybody comes to this with different baggage and different expectations, and also potentially wants slightly different things from you. Yeah. And that's where the real clashes can come sometimes.
Yeah, because I guess in business, it might be a young person, just wants a really good salary. Some people just want to go out and earn the money, and that's what is really critical to them. Other people will be there because of the value behind the business that they're working for. So how do you get those sort of dynamics right, Jason?
Well, I mean, I suppose it all starts with hiring, right? But they say every bad hire starts with a good interview. But what's a bad hire though, right? Because you might think someone was great at the start, but what they came into, actually they weren't a bad hire. It's just that your environment wasn't right for them. So I think there's that piece about being really clear about who you are as an organization, what you want, what they can expect. But also I suppose there sometimes can be a disconnect between who's interviewing and who's running the organization as well, whether that be HR and CEO, whether that be senior leaders and what have you. So I suppose what we try to do, I think for me, what's really important, people coming on board is one, letting people know that, hey, we're an organization that aspires to be one known for caring about the individuals within it. And we try and show that through, the flexibility we give to people, the ownership that we give to people, the regular kind of days off and periods, we try to do that. So, and then I think it's just, then I think the next piece from there is then saying, well, this is what we have to offer. We've increased the number of kind of reviews that we do throughout the year, because we've kind of gone away with the annual review and kind of something a more regular check-in, but it's not focused so much on pure performance. It's a lot more forward thinking, and it's about looking at where people feel they are right now, how quickly have things changed, what do they want to get done, is there anything, projects that they've got going on that they want to run with, because a big part of work as well is you've got the job to do, but sometimes you found a white space, and there's other things that you want to run away with, and sometimes in some jobs they'll say no, you've just got to do this. And I'm a big fan of saying, well, actually, no, let people explore, because if that's going to help them enjoy their job more and potentially add value, it's going to put us in good shape. So I think, I don't think there's no perfect way to do it, but I think as an employee, if you can, I suppose, take the risk with giving people a lot of freedom and being open and do a lot of things to help people be as good as they can be, usually you'll reap the rewards. And if you don't, maybe you've got to tweak it. And I think it's an ongoing process. It definitely doesn't end after, 1 or 2 or 3 new policies.
Yeah. Chris, your business is called The Culture Builders. That's what you help businesses do. That's what you help senior leaders do. So, where do you start when you're going into one of these big global organizations that you work with, and who do you start with, actually?
Well, I was going to pick up, and I'll flow into that from what Jason was saying there in terms of people you bring into an organization, because one of the things that we go in and initially have a conversation about is a phrase we use, which is it's savers and investors. And it's a way of thinking about the types of people you have in your organization. And it comes from the old adage that when you look at ham and eggs, the chicken's involved, but the pig's committed. And savers and investors says a saver is someone that comes in and is your salary person. They want a good wage. They're going to work hard for it. They won't cause any problems. They're a good worker and they get stuff done. Brilliant, but it's very transactional. And if something comes along that's a better deal, they'll probably move, because for them, work's just work. The investors are people that absolutely bet their shirt on work, and they're passionate about what you do. They love the work. They feel that it gives them meaning and purpose, and they work the extra mile, which is kind of where you can see then the burnout, because those people don't have the off button. And a few years ago, we worked with the Red Cross to try and help some of their teams know when to stop, because they were going so far to help people. They were injuring and damaging, and in some points losing their lives from the care. So what we look at is what's the makeup of an organization, but then who's running the organization that can actually manage those people? Because you go in and you say about savers and investors, and an organization say, we need loads of investors. We need loads of people that are passionate, that care. But then you've got to think, well, who's going to manage them? Because investors, people that are passionate, are not quiet. If you do something wrong, they'll tell you, and they'll argue with you, and they'll point it out. And if you try and run them into the ground and use them badly, they will shout. So one of the things we look at is an organization's ability to have a more dynamic workforce that is pushing back. And then your point about, Jason, you're saying there about giving people that kind of space. There's a great Spotify user all the time. They talk about alignment and autonomy, and how good are organizations aligning people with what needs doing and the purpose around doing it, and then giving them the space to make it happen. So really good organizations everyone knows where you're going, but also they know how personally they're going to do it. They're not sat there waiting to be fed and to be told. And when you create that sort of dynamic as well, what you also give, to kind of bring it back into the topic, is you give people more space to work in ways that do allow for bursts and allow for downtime, and allow them to kind of manage and collate the work. If you need to get something done, and I don't worry about how you do it, and I'm then not watching, expecting to be sat there at 9 a.m. working until a certain time. You will pick your own rhythm and away you go. So I think it's that maturity. And the ultimate word is trust. A lot of what we're talking about here is trusting people that they will do the right thing and will take it from there. And Jason talks about bringing in the right people. There's the famous Zappos story of when Zappos would hire people, in the first few weeks, they keep offering them money to leave. And the view was, if someone said, great, yeah, okay, I'll take $1,000 and leave, they weren't the right person in the first place. And it would probably cost less to give them $1,000 now than in 6 months' time go through a painful process around it. So I think it's that an organization recognizing that its workforce is a dynamic thing that you have to have your hands in and on to help shape correctly. If you leave a workforce, it will go wild. You know, if you don't mow your lawn, it goes to seed, even though you started off with fresh green grass. So it's that care and consistency and input that you do to the workforce that gets it where you want it to be, and it wants to be as well. I think that's the thing.
Yeah. Parul, you try and create this kind of togetherness in the teams that you work with, don't you? So how are there some techniques that you particularly use to enable what Chris says that should happen?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's, you know, what both Jason and Chris were talking about is this element of personalization, right? So in each of our teams it's a unique makeup, and we can start with recruitment, but actually most people are going into existing teams and you're bringing new people in. As Jason was saying, it's a dynamic situation and it's a relationship that needs to be nurtured. And we need to invest in those relationships just like any other. So one of the things that we do at Fuel and Move is that we've created a game. So it's created a fun environment, a safe environment where people can act, where we can allow people to be themselves and see what happens, help them see for themselves and realize what's going on for them, how their buttons are pushed and how they turn up and how that affects their behavior, their performance in a team setting. And then when we debrief that down, it actually allows us to debrief not from a perspective of a recalled self-perception, but from a live actual, what actually happened. How do you actually feel? And we've had some really remarkable results from that because it is a fun environment. You're fully immersed. It's a game, and that allows us to see what's really going on. And then when we debrief, we actually dig down into what are the we've spoken about motivations, and sometimes there are motivations, and when we're talking about motivations, they're really unmet needs. There are things that we are aware of that we can see, and there are things that lie below that conscious level, which are really driving everything. And we actually work with a collaborating coach who uses like a Enneagram based assessment so that we can dig right down underneath and understand what's really driving this, because your behaviors can actually, or the behaviors can look the same, but what's important is for us to understand what's driving that, what are the triggers for it, so we can set you up. Almost like I always describe it, once people have been through the process, it leaves them in a place almost like we see Cristiano Ronaldo playing in his heyday, in his peak, was like he's got more time on the ball than the other players. Like he sees the play coming through before it actually happens. And with this, with our game training, it actually sets people up to put them in that position where they can see ahead of time what's going to trigger them and prepare for it and be in a better position so that they're not going into that place where the fracture and the misalignment can happen. It also helps build the bridges because people start to understand each other better, and that trust then just goes through the roof.
I mean, has hybrid working changed this, Parul? Because obviously, we're now managing teams that we might not necessarily see face to face. Now, I know that there's always been that, in a global organization, you're not necessarily going to get together with everybody that you work with all the time, as you'll well know as an international lawyer in your heyday. So is there a subtle change that hybrid working has made to all this at all, Parul, or is it just as it always has been?
I think what we're experiencing it at a much larger scale now. So those of us who were working in global environments pre-pandemic, we weren't thinking about it as a thing. Oh, I've got a virtual team. The fact of the matter is we often worked with virtual teams in all different in different jurisdictions and time zones. And you found ways to make sure that there was this connectivity and alignment between your teammates. So that hasn't changed, but I think what we're seeing now is that there's a lot of change happening at the same time, which is compounding the conversation, how people interpret, how people see it. But it does bring its own challenges, because if like any relationship, if you don't spend time with someone, then that relationship is essentially just going to break down and go away. And that's a positive story, because the other side is that it breaks down and causes havoc. And so we do need to adapt to create points of connection, points where we can actually reach, where we can develop this mutual understanding and alignment. It doesn't, and that especially now where we have workforces which are more, where we're more aware of the diversity, and we're trying to bring in people who think different and behave different, but it's a far cry from bringing in a diverse workforce and then making it work for the benefit of the team, for the organization, for whoever you're serving in your team. Because what does it mean if you're diverse? You've all got different perspectives. You're going to have different opinions. You come to the same. You see the same thing with different interpretations of it. So it becomes all the more important that that we're proactive in creating opportunities to connect, opportunities to grow that mutual understanding between team players.
And team players, obviously, Jason, that's exactly what you're trying to do, creating a team, that's going to win medals. And I guess the pressure there is that, if the team weren't to be successful, then you've got pressure of funding, sponsors and all the rest of it, isn't it? So there's like another dynamic to the pressure that those people would be under, not just the players, but also the team that you're building and the strategy that you're building to make that team successful. You all kind of fall if that team, doesn't perform.
Yeah, massively, and I think it's really easy to, especially when perhaps results aren't going your way, to really crank up the pressure in unhelpful ways. And of course you need to look at yourself as an organization when you haven't had success, and say, all right, actually, were we doing all the things that we needed to do? I mean, I think that's just a natural part of the process, but you need to make sure you don't kind of increase expectations at the expense of, the culture of the business, or making people feel undervalued, or, just adding additional pressure and stress, which may not even necessarily add any value, but just because we feel like we need to micromanage people more because they've not done well. And I just think it takes a little bit of bravery sometimes to actually, not do the things that feel sometimes, like that gut instinct. Someone's usually down, take time, take a step back and actually think, let's not look to the immediate things that we think, are going to turn up, again, training more hours or adding extra days or taking away holiday. Actually, let's look at some of these other things. And we're actually going through that period right now as we're 14 minutes out from the Paralympics. And, where I'm kind of at is actually where are the bits we can add in which complement the rest of the program, rather than trying to, change the program and just make everyone work harder. Yeah.
And Chris, it's another sporting analogy. The football manager gets, sacked as soon as the results don't work out for a month or whatever. And as I think Pep Guardiola was saying the other day, thank you for sticking with it, because actually, success doesn't come overnight. Mostly, it's a long period of process and change and building the right culture again.
Yeah, absolutely. And we use the phrase a lot, test and learn. And one of the things you see, particularly in business, is people are afraid to talk about failure, and they see negative numbers and negative trends as something to try and quickly change and fix. And what we don't often do is stop and look at root cause, or celebrate failure, or pick apart what's happened to learn from it. And I think it's a really ugly knee-jerk reaction to sack the person in charge without understanding how many different factors there are. Particularly, business is massively complex, and you're playing business in a very difficult global environment right now. So one of our team has a great phrase, and she says, in a complex system, there's no direct cause and effect. And I think it's a case very much, you cannot just point at one person and say, it's your fault. They're rare. The only one I can think of recently was when the whole BA system went down and it turned out someone had unplugged the computer. Those don't come along often anymore. It's systemic issues. So organizations that build strength are the ones that stick with it and stick with the people, and they mature them and grow them. And if a manager and their team is not performing, you look at how you help them first. Because if it's a good manager and you suddenly remove them, you're probably going to just wind that team back and lose talent. And talent right now is scarce in certain industries. There's only 1 or 2 industries that's got a glut because of the downturn.
Yeah. What about younger employers coming into the marketplace, Chris? Are they demanding more when they, when they're starting out, in a legal firm, in a really great, successful business? Has that changed at all?
I would definitely, from my experience and what I hear from the people we work with, definitely, because the first thing that's happened is that over the last generation, education has changed. Education traditionally was about making children behave and to remember certain things. Education now is much more about exploration, understanding, and also about bringing out the person. So education now is handing the workforce a very different young person who, and a great story, worked with an organisation that still employs stonemasons on a regular basis. And traditionally, the stonemason apprentices would come in and they would be silent for the first couple of years. They would just chip away literally at the stone, stay quiet and earn their spurs. Then they say now that the stonemason apprentices are coming in and they want to be part of everything. They're vocal, they're noisy, they're opinionated, and it's brilliant because you've got this conversation coming in. The challenge that some organizations are seeing, though, is that the current generation, because they're not as tough and hard-skinned, they don't react as well to pressure. Now, back to this early point about how do we help people manage appropriate pressure and stress so that they understand when it's coming, how to cope with it, but then how to vocalize and call out the inappropriate stress and pressure. And we haven't talked about it yet, but one of the things that sits front and center around this is psychological safety. And lots of organizations will say to us, how do we create psychological safety? As if it's a thing, let's do psychological safety. And of course it's not. It's the output of all the things like listening to people when they're saying I'm stressed and helping them. It's giving people a voice. So what you've got is a young workforce coming in that are vocal, that are not as tough or as resilient as traditionally we've seen in the workplace, which is probably a good thing. You look at Gen Xers, we're a pretty tough, unpleasant group of people because we went through quite a lot. We had horrible schooling and we took it into the workforce. We went in with the kind of fight mentality. That's not happening now. So I think there's a meeting in the middle that work should not be somewhere that damages people, but equally, as people come in, we need to make sure that they can cope with the ups and downs. And it's a team conversation, as Parul was saying, that each team's different. And Parul's work in looking at teams individually is exactly what needs to happen.
Yeah. And Parul, I mean, let's put a sort of scenario together that you've got maybe a young, sort of fairly new lawyer want to make an impression to the senior partners. There's work that's got to be done. It's got to be done on the weekend. They've worked all hours. They've come in the next week and they're right. Okay, on we go. With those sorts of scenarios, I mean, obviously there are times when that's got to happen. So how does well-being fit into a scenario where you've just got to get stuff done, you've got to get it out the door, there's no other thing that you can do, the business has got to be done? How with these younger people then can you support them to be a bit tougher without breaking them?
You said that like it's a hypothetical. This is what actually happens in the sector. In fact, someone just called me this morning with exactly this scenario.
I didn't talk to them, honest.
But exactly the scenario, and I think look, I was quite frankly, it's about taking a read of the environment that you're in and connecting back to your why. Why are you there in the first place? Was it because what was your motivation for being there? You obviously knew what you were going into, or didn't you? And asking yourself, on the one hand, reconnecting with why you're there and reminding yourself that is more important than some of the inconveniences, and put some own boundaries around yourself. So, you say, I know this is going to be hard. This is not sustainable for the long term, but I'm going to do it, as many of us think. I'm going to do it for 2 years, then I'm out of here. I'm going to get my experience. I want this name on my CV to say that I've done it, and then I'm going to go on to the next thing. And that can help just contextualize the pain, if you like. Like if you're training in the gym and you have to go and your trainer's pushing you to full exhaustion, It's something you're like, okay, I'm going to do it, but it's to this point and then it's going to stop. But the other piece of it is that because it's, you know, we want to empower people, enable people to take responsibility for their own well-being, because of course we don't have the capability to make other people do what we want them to do always, especially not in these large organizations which have these cultures, long hour cultures, and don't have the R&R built into the cadence of work allocation. And so it's about, okay, let's look at what you do have control over. How can and how do you leverage that? But I think the key one for people in this particular situation is remind yourself of why you're there. Remind yourself, you know, almost take yourself back to that day you got the offer and you're super excited, and day one of being on the job, and reconnect with that excitement, and within the safety rails, if you like. Knowing, well, you know, I knew I was coming into this, but it's only for this period of time. And once I've got it on there, I'm going to go and find a culture that fits me better, that allows me to be more of who I want to be, the type of lawyer I want to be. But the worst case scenario is that if you just get on that treadmill with your eyes closed and you just slog it out, and you don't take care of yourself, and you're not looking, you know, if you don't look after yourself, you can't expect other people to look after you as a delegated responsibility. That's not going to work.
Jason, there's the individual bit and then there's the organizational bit, isn't it? I guess it's easy to sort of to say that, you know, the person, whether they're young or old, can sort of look into themselves and put those barriers, but you know, the organization still has the same demands on it. So how do you balance that out?
Well, I think it's really important for leaders to try and be, I think it goes back to what we said before about creating that real clarity about, I think Chris was saying about real clarity about what we're trying to achieve, because I think some organizations will, and especially some leaders will want, you know, it'll be like the red dot being shown for a cat, you know, as soon as they see something, they just want to jump at it, and you'll just be throwing all these demands onto people, individuals, and they'll be doing all these different things, and they won't necessarily know why they're doing it, because a new one comes up every week, but all of them need to be done yesterday. And so what I've specifically been trying to do over the last couple of years is just really just narrow it down in terms of what are the important things, what are the things that are going to move the needle, and not being scared to just double down on those few things. And that actually really goes against my nature, because in my head I'm thinking, you know, if you throw enough things against the wall, something will stick and we'll have some incredible work and we'll just grind. And it's taken a while for me to say, actually, no, because everybody, I think, goes back to that purpose piece and how people work, and maybe potentially from an athlete background, right? Especially if you've gone through an athlete background as well, right? You've pushed yourself to a certain limit that a lot of people haven't put themselves through. Or if you're a business owner and you've been absolutely grinding from day one, and you'll put yourself to whatever you've done on those hours, but those people are actually in the minority a lot of the time. And I think you need to remember that not everybody's prepared to go that hard for the business or for the organization, but also it's not a healthy way to do it, and you're actually not being as productive as possible. So yeah, let's try and scale things back as good as possible. Let's do a few things really, really well, and then we'll just take it from there.
Yeah. Listen, thank you so much. We're just about to wrap up the conversation. So for everybody who's tuned in, if you do have a question that you want to ask, do share it with us now and we'll try and answer that quickly for you. But I hope you found everything that we've been talking about today really useful, and there's things that you can take back to your business or organization to actually have a think about. I'd love to sort of round off really by asking the three of you, you know, what's the main message that you'd like people to take away from this conversation today? Parul, perhaps I could start with you. What would be the sort of the message that you'd like to leave with everybody?
I think the main message is that well-being, try and get well-being within your control, and take responsibility for it, and do what you can, whether you're a leader or a manager or somebody further down the chain as a junior. And don't be afraid to do something different. Don't be afraid to speak out and focus down, as Jason was saying, you know, doubling down on the things that matter. Getting that clarity that allows you to prioritize in the right way is absolutely critical. But I think just well-being and high performance go hand in hand. So let's work towards that. Let's find out, let's figure out where that's breaking down and solve for that.
Yeah. And Jason, what would you like to leave people with?
I just think as anyone who's, you know, an employer or a senior leader, just to know that actually more hours doesn't always equal more quality, or, you know, high pressure. I think Paul says this quite well. High pressure doesn't directly mean high performance. And actually taking a step back, giving people a bit more space can actually lead to high performance and high results.
Yeah, busy doesn't always mean good, does it? Yeah. And Chris, perhaps you'd like to round off with a note to the senior leaders who've joined us today for this webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. I again, just echoing Parul's point there about the intertwined nature of performance and well-being. You really can't have one without the other in terms of the well-being. And there's lots of stats, but the most memorable one is that for every pound you spend on well-being, you get a 10x return on performance and productivity. That it's critical. It's not a nice to have. And what we've got to look at is well-being as a systemic issue, and think about it not from just the tools and the process we put in place, but from the attitudes, the habits and the behaviors that we encourage around it. Because having a well-being portal but having a toxic culture isn't the solution. You know, having a well-being culture is.
Yeah, absolutely. If people are interested in the work you do, Chris, the Culture Builders, that's the website to go and have a look at.
It is. The company's named after the book, so it's fairly easy to remember.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. And Parul, Fuel and Move, the place to go for some in-house training.
Yeah, there's fuelandmove.com, but I've also got a podcast, Water and Air, that's available on all the usual platforms.
Excellent.
And those small everyday tips that require no budget, so you can put them straight into action.
Brilliant. And Jason, we all need to follow Great Britain's wheelchair rugby team.
That's right. Yes, follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and you know, if you're someone who wants to get involved in the sport as well, we have a Find a Club on the website, and you know, we're always trying to grow the sport and get more people with disabilities active and moving. So if anyone wants to help be part of that, then please get in touch.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Thank you all three of you for being such fantastic guests this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. Listen, we hope this conversation has really helped you to understand why putting well-being at the heart of what you do really does help you achieve the best high-performing organisation. We'll share this recording with everybody afterwards, so please do share with colleagues and friends that you think might be able to use this in their workplace as well. And we'll also put it on our YouTube channel and also our employee wellbeing platform, Ashia, where you can also find lots of other fantastic wellbeing content to help you in your workplaces with broadcast, podcasts, expert content. And there are some fantastic videos there from Parul and Chris's companies to help you help your people. So do follow us on social media, visit our website to find more, or get yourself a demo of our employee wellbeing platform. A final thank you to Jason, Chris and Parul for your company today. And we really hope that everybody who's tuned in has found our conversation insightful and helpful. Enjoy the rest of your day.